You're listening to The Photography Pod, a show for both working professionals and enthusiast photographers alike. And here's your hosts, Steve Vaughan and Nick Church.
So hello to you, the listener, and thank you for downloading this episode of The Photography Pod with me, Nick Church, and my good mate, Steve Vaughan. The Photography Pod brings you the world's most inspirational photographers, and we are joined by another great guest today. This week, who is garden photographer and author Jason Ingram, and who we'll be meeting with shortly. So it's a busy time of year for Steve and I thought just for this week, it'd be quite good to just see a little bit behind the curtain of the Photography Pod. So Steve and I, strap in, Steve. That's what I can say.
God, what are you going to do? Hello, dear listener. I don't know what he's going to do here. We didn't rehearse this, as you probably can gather.
Steve and I live a life full of excesses and luxury, the only excess and luxury that come with being the two of the UK's youngest and most sought after podcasters.
If only that was true.
So you might be surprised, but it's not just about classy movie premieres for us and chauffeurs, but like you, listener, we can sometimes succumb to everyday excesses and temptations. And in that vein, I'm saddened to let you know, it's quite shocking, but we both were banned this week we were forced to resign our membership for our private members club in Mayfair. And
No.
As a key part of the young social elite, you're probably wondering what possibly could we have done to force this to happen? But in fact, there were two different offences from both of us. So to just go through those in detail, Steve was criticised heavily from club members when during the chairman's New Year's address, he was caught watching Aston Villa on his phone.
And what's wrong with that?
and that would have been fine. But when Leon Bailey slotted away the 76-minute winner against Leicester, Steve put his dress shirt over his head, stormed around the drawing room, screaming, "Get in, up yours, filthy Leicester." Now, this melee completely derailed the chairman's ceremonial opening of the champagne with his club sword, and he then took out a huge chunk of his finger.
Have you been taking drugs?
This incident actually came after Steve was already on his last warning for no street photography in the members bar. Anyway, Nick's offence is even more serious, and it's following one too many port and lemons in the Oyster Bar. He became aware of a senior member who was a photography enthusiast and a listener to this podcast, showing off his new bridge camera to other members. So when the members started bragging about the extraordinary zoom range in such a small package, Nick finally saw red and started an F and C laden barrage against the member, talking about sensor sizes and the inability of this model even to shoot RAW files. So finally, frustrated that none of the other members seemed the least bit interested in Nick's talk about image noise, he finally set fire to their top hats and then was sick in the plate of oysters. So we've left this life behind, and actually we had an in-person meetup yesterday, which had none of these excesses. It was just Steve and I in my studio, nice cup of coffee and a sensible chat. So that was lovely, wasn't it, Steve?
I'm just stunned by that last 5 minutes, really. I don't know where that come from. You've either been on magic mushrooms or you found some bizarre meme on the internet you decided to.
I am on a particularly strong course of painkillers. It might be that. No, I'm not. It's fine. But that was nice to meet up in person, wasn't it?
It was great to meet up.
Thanks
and I need to apologise to our guests who's probably wondering what the hell he's doing actually right now. Bear with us, Jason. But no, seriously, it was great to meet up. I was down in Bristol for a personal matter, and it was great to pop in and see the vast studio that you have compared to my little cubby hole that I sit in here. This is a converted garage that I have to work from, and I can almost touch both walls from here. So you seem to have something the size of a football pitch for a studio, which is very, very nice. And very, very jealous.
Well, at least it's tidy. You did come at a good time because I've finished the New Year's.
The car boot sale was finished.
The New Year's car boot sale, yeah. There's just the cupboard of doom left to go, but we're going to come on to that a bit later.
We are.
What else have you been up to this week, Steve?
Apart from meeting you, we're actually, so although this show will come out and our normal interview, this is actually the week after we recorded the last one, so probably not much since we recorded the last one with Christian, really. But usual stuff. So with my training business, I'm working on a couple of projects there and a couple of slide decks that I've got to deliver. I'm delivering a training course in Cambridge later this week with my corporate sales training, as you know. So I've got a pre-wedding shoot to do tomorrow, and then our first wedding actually happens on the end of January, which I'm quite looking forward to, actually.
Oh,
back in the saddle. Yeah. How about you?
Well, it's similar. I've got my first wedding in a couple of weeks. This week I have been... Well, I announced I did the news thing about the that I'll be at the photography show.
You did
this year on the 10th and 11th of March at the XL in London. So looking forward to that. It's going to be a couple of sessions. One about what matters most to our clients, and the spoiler is that it's not what we think it is, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast about things like image sharpness and image noise and all those things that clients don't care a bit about.
No, they don't. No.
Or certainly most clients don't. And certainly our clients don't. I'm sure there are some clients that do for other genres. The other one is about like a photography myth buster about, so the classic example being that you'll see spread all over Facebook groups that you must never ship your RAWs. And I think, well, until someone says, "Come here, I'll give you £1,000 for the RAWs," and you say, "Well, absolutely. How do you want me to send them to you? Should I just drive them around?" There's other stuff. We chat a little bit about a new training platform that I'll be creating this year. So that's really exciting, but that's all still early days for that. So anyway, yeah. So today we've got Jason Ingram, who thanks very much, Jason. And so you're just down the road, and you'd have thought that it would be easy to come up in person to do this, but it's actually there's loads of technical difficulties doing it in person. Steve and I will do a show in person at some point, but it's a bit tougher than doing it remotely.
Jason, great to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
really pleased for joining. Thanks for joining us, Jason. So Jason studied at Salisbury College. As I said, he's based in Bristol, here in Bristol. He's primarily, I think it's fair to say, a gardens photographer, but has loads of other genres that he works on. And so welcome to the pod, Jason.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's really, really nice to be here and see you guys and see how you operate this show as well, which is very interesting.
As you can see, it's slick and seamless and polished. And
I mean, that first 5 minutes, wow. I'll have to digest that later.
Well, you got to think. I always think that there's no point just doing something the same as everyone else does it. Let's do it different.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Jason, do you want to give us like a potted sort of history of your journey into photography and how you've got to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I as you said, I studied at Salisbury College of Art, finished many years ago. In fact, 1992. It was a editorial and advertising based at Salisbury, so it was very much geared towards, I would say, quite commercial work, which is good. Certainly fitted the work that I was kind of looking to do. Although I spent most of my time in the landscape, out and about, trying to sort of avoid being in the studio. So one of the very first jobs I had after finishing college was actually working for a postcard company, believe it or not.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which is John Hind. John Hind used, in fact, Martin Parr was fascinated by all the sort of early works of John Hind, things like the boring postcard books. Well, that was the kind of work that I was taking initially, these scenes that I had to drive around the country and try and find pictures basically from existing postcards. So I had a bag full of postcards shot sort of in the early 60s, and I had to go to those exact spots and update them. So it was interesting on many levels. And so they had these kind of basic photograph postcards I had to obtain, and then something that was called the impression range, which was the sort of slightly more expensive postcard where I could actually let go creatively and find sort of new scenes. So sort of from there, it was like I suppose about I did that for about 7 months. Then I headed off to Canada for about 6 or 7 months. Stayed. I was over in Montreal, so I did some assisting over there as well.
I think our last three guests you included have had a link to Canada.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wasn't your last guest actually Canadian?
Yeah, he was Canadian. Yeah, he was Canadian.
That's a good link.
Then came either born in the UK. I'd have to go back and listen, and then moved to Canada for his early life. And then Steve Gerrard was from Yorkshire, I think, and then moved to Canada, and now
he's from Birmingham.
Okay,
oh, he's from the Midlands. Yeah.
So I was there for quite a while, in fact. And in fact, I was assisting a food photographer to Montreal for a short while and did a few other things. But then the main reason for going there was to do a trip up to the very northern parts, subarctic region of going to the Northwest Territories in sort of February time. To take some landscape pictures up there. So landscapes were always my driving force initially, but then when I came back to the UK and did sort of the usual route of assisting lots of different photographers, mainly within the fields of advertising, shooting everything from food to interiors to cars, that kind of stuff. I obviously, as an assistant, it's really important to kind of keep your personal work going all the time. Your own book, keeping it up to date, constantly going out and sort of seeing people, because it was all, letters and phone calls, that kind of side of things. Mm-hmm. And garden photography was never really something I'd ever considered. It wasn't a sort of an area of sort of professional photography I thought even existed. Mm. And then I kind of started doing a few things for the National Trust, just for their library, and obtained access to gardens in the UK, and that sort of pushed me into that sort of area, really. So I really loved the sort of area of work. So so that was the first ventures into it.
Had you got a background at all in horticulture or gardening?
No,
or
not
were you
at
a
all.
keen gardener even? Or
yeah, keen gardener now,
okay.
And my wife's a gardening editor. So
right,
yeah. So and we do books together as well. So so it's very much part of our life now. But initially, certainly not.
I suppose. Is it? I suppose it's fair to say that a lot of I can see the link between gardens and food photography, because a lot of restaurants or more organics kind of producers of food, that's a very important part of the process of where the produce is coming from, isn't it? Their gardens, their homegrown things. So have you found that you're shooting a lot of gardens that then spills into where that produce is ending up on the plate? Yeah,
it does, because I've had very much so, and that's the kind of side of food that I've shot. So I've done quite a few cookbooks actually over the years, but those cookbooks have generally stemmed from I worked with an author called James Wong, who did a BBC series actually called Grow Your Own Drugs many years ago.
I remember that.
And I did 3 books with him, which were recipe based books, but they're very much stem from growing, the growing side of it. So fork to fork, if you like. So I do shoot a fair amount of food editorially for publishing for books, but as I said, it's all really stemmed from the garden work that I do, and that's kind of the process of it, really.
Let me share some of your photos, Jason, if you don't mind. Let's do that. Where are we?
Just while Nick's doing that, Jason. So, what would a typical job be then? A typical client? How who would be the sort of person that would book a garden photographer and pay for a garden photographer?
Well, I'm sort of, in lots of ways, it's I'm in a very an old school. There's James Wong there actually. I'm in a very old school area, because I still work pretty much to print, meaning that my clients are editorial clients, which could either be a magazine or a publisher, a book publisher. So most of my work comes in a commission form from the magazine, or I get commissioned to shoot a book.
Right.
I also work with landscape architects, garden designers, which is another big part of my work. So it's very similar to how we're always told in college that to editorial work in the fashion world has always led to bigger commissions, really. So we all know that editorially, quite often the money hasn't been seen to be as good as, say, advertising. But of course, the one thing that editorial gives you is exposure and profile. So it's when your work's being shown in really, really good, high quality, top selling magazines, of course, everyone's seeing that work. And when you start to get the phone calls from landscape architects and garden designers asking you to photograph their gardens, of course, sure, that's a win-win, because quite often what happens then is that I get commissioned by a top designer. I photograph the garden. I obviously get a payment from that side of things, but also then part of the deal is also that ideally they'd like to have, not always, but ideally they like to have magazine exposure as well.
Right.
So of course that means that, but it's a very close group of people working in the industry, so everyone gets to know who works with who. So quite often, a magazine may call me up to say that we know you've been photographing Tom Stewart Smith's work or Pete Aldoff's work or whatever. What do you have that you've shot recently that we could consider for the magazine? So that's a sort of a situation where that can work. You get double the money if you like. So it stems from that. So, but it's I'd say 85% of what I do is print based. So not very much sort of online stuff. Although saying that, of course, magazines now have to have an online presence as well. So video creeps into my work a little bit as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think often the case. I see that Jason, you've got you do sell artworks like wall art as well.
Yeah, a very small amount. I do it. I do sell. I often get, not often, but I have been in the past asked to supply work for sort of venues, hospitals. Also, I've been asked to do a couple of things for some banks as well. So I get asked to sort of curate stuff to put together for these places, but also I sell through Saatchi as well, which is another place. Okay. But again, it's literally they look after it all. So I'm not always entirely sure how well it does, but I do. I still like to. I'd love to be able to sell more work in print form, really. But as we all know,
it's lovely work. I looked at the Saatchi, your stuff on Saatchi, and I'm far from a horticulturalist or gardener, but I know a beautiful snowdrop when I see one, and there's some really
there's some nice there are some nice snowdrops on there actually. And but I mean, when I was at college, I used to have a stand in Covent Garden selling photographs, sort of early 90s. So. And people weren't really buying photographs in the same way as they are now, I would say. But so I've always, I mean, it'd be lovely. I mean, I'd love to sort of be in a situation where I could do, as I said, could do more of that really. But
sure.
It's just not commercially viable.
I think. No, it's the same for any landscape photographers that we've had on the pod, and it's the same the world over that you all would typically landscape photographer would augment that with training, tours, and other things. They would love just to do the artwork and wall art and things. But
yes,
the sums don't add up. So there's one thing that does spring into my mind, and comparing yourself with the sort of the last two guests we've had on, from the out and out food photography, and a lot of their work is very controlled. Studio based, everything's under the control, the lighting, the positioning, everything. Now you've got an element, and I use that word advisedly, that is out of your control, and that's the great British weather.
Yes.
So I wonder how that impacts your work, particularly, if you've got a big shoot planned and the forecast is it's going to be a glorious summer's day and it pees you down with rain all day. How do you work around that?
I mean, God knows why I ever decided that this would be the best place to be. Because I tell you what, it's really, really hard. And anyone that shoots gardens will tell you the same thing, that we're a nation of garden lovers, yet we have the conditions that make a job as a garden photographer extremely hard. So I suppose, in a nutshell, what we have to do is... because one of the things that's really, and I mentioned this in the book that I've just written, which is How to Photograph Gardens, and it is very much about timing how you work, because it's called the golden hour for a reason. It lasts for about an hour. I mean, it's as simple as that. And that is the time when you can really get those amazing, beautiful, wider opening shots, the shots that the magazine, when they commission you to go and shoot a garden, they will be reliant on you producing an image that will say as much about the garden in one shot that has to be taken in the most incredible light, which is normally a double page spread, a DPS. Right. So those kind of shots you can only obtain in those in perfect condition. And if it's not perfect conditions, then you sort of have to go back and back again. So when you really delve into our conditions and our weather forecasts, it's quite amazing you don't generally have. I mean, we all think, you like last summer is a classic example. We'll think back to last summer. It was terrible. The weather was awful, but it wasn't. I mean, generally it wasn't.
The weddings I was photographing.
Yeah, well, there you go. So you guys, the thing is, you guys go rain or shine, don't you? It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a book of shoots that I go into the season with. So, I mean, when I say the season, of course, I'm shooting now, and last week was a classic example. We've had the best winter I've known for a very, very long time. This is
because of the frost.
Because of the frost, we had literally a week of -2, -3 conditions almost everywhere in the country. And you always have a book of things that need to be shot for magazines, stuff that you need to add to a book, a seasonal bit. And of course, the only conditions you can really have for those shoots is frosty, beautiful light, those kind of conditions. And when you get them in the winter, it's wonderful because you can shoot almost all day long, which obviously the days are much shorter, but the sun rises later, sets earlier. So your window of shooting is much, much longer than it would be in the summer months. Whereas in summer months, I have quite a few different elements to my work. So, I mean, although I shoot what I would say would be a garden feature or a beautiful garden feature, I also shoot things like plant profiles. So that will be a collection of going to a specialist grower that grows, I don't know, loads and loads of different varieties of roses or loads and loads of different varieties of lavender or whatever, which of course, these are the kind of shots that I can take in all sorts of conditions because I can control it because it's a much, much smaller shot.
Yeah, got you. Yeah.
So as long as I've planned where I can be and all my clients have helped as well and said, we want you to photograph X, Y, and Z this June. Another person say, so I'll have a big spreadsheet of all the shoots that I need to obtain over that season, where they are in the country, and then attached to that, I'll also have an idea of what the weather's doing and where. Because I mean, I do a lot for a couple of designers in southeast England, in sort of Sussex and into Kent, and of course the weather is often much, much better there than it is certainly over in sort of the wet
Wales.
Bristol area of Wales. Yeah, exactly. Wales.
There's a reason it's so green. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I'm very organised. And I've always enjoyed that sort of organised side of my work, and again the same with shooting for libraries, because I still shoot stock pictures for libraries. Because
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because I've heard it. I think I may have even heard it on your podcast before, and I certainly heard it on many others, that people don't believe that it still exists. That you can earn money from taking stock photography, which of course generic stock photography has been lost and was lost many, many years ago to the likes of Alamy and Getty and whatever else, and things like AI creeping into our world now. But when you've got gardening magazines and gardening books published on specific gardening material, they want to know that they can get the exact thing that they want. So they don't just want a picture of a rose. They want a very, very specific picture of a rose.
A particular
species, particular cultivar. Yeah. So, of course, one of the other things that I have to do is when I shoot, I have to be able to put in metadata and caption the work as well. And then, of course, then once that's back with me after it's been published in a magazine, I then filter that into the Gap Photos, which is a garden and plant photography agency, and they sell worldwide. And unfortunately, they do have competition with the likes of Alamy, but as I said, when a client goes to them, they know that they are going to get exactly the picture
specific thing they want for the shoot. Yeah,
that's interesting that that's even defined as stock photography to me, because I always seem stock photography as a bit more of a incidental tool to augment an article or a book, rather than, whereas what you're talking about is almost more like product photography, just a library of products that just happen to be plants. They're all really nicely shot and their catalogs and everything else. It not occurred to me that stock photography can elevate into sort of high end, good quality photography as well as sort of everyday things that people might put alongside a blog post or news article.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is with well, I say magazines, it's probably more than that. I mean, I get when I get my sales statements through, I see sales statements from everything from traditional magazine publishers to nurseries as well, nurseries that are selling stuff online.
Of course, yeah.
All sorts of online horticultural companies are all seeking pictures. Because I mean, in lots of ways, photography is used way, way more than I ever remembered it. Certainly when I was first in the world of photography. I mean, it's everywhere now, isn't it? And if, because of the online presence, if people are selling something, you need to be able to see it. You just need to be able to see it. But interestingly, one of the things that's starting to creep up quite a bit is we get copyright claim fee now as well, which is really well. It's a very interesting one because what's happening is people are just stealing pictures. Simple as that.
No, we know about that.
They're putting into Google, they're putting in what they want to find. Of course, your picture might come up. They grab the picture and then they use it on their Facebook page for selling.
Or they create a slideshow for a podcast.
Oh yeah, they are selling off it. Or I've had all sorts of things from the agency. So the agency every month will send me several emails saying, "Did you license this picture?" and send me a link to where my picture's being used. And I'm getting absolutely hundreds of them at the moment. I haven't seen any returns yet, but I am seeing hundreds of them. And they've got a piece of software that they can basically put in their entire. I mean, they've got millions of pictures in their library, and I don't know what software they're using, but they're using something. And they're putting it into Google, and it's coming back where those pictures are being used. So that's
just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's free.
No, I mean that's a whole nother podcast for you guys. I'm sure.
Is that right? I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is because I think as in that respect, photography has partly been devalued for that. Really,
completely. Yeah, and we get the same challenges in the wedding industry as well.
I'm sure you do, because do your clients have restrictions on?
It's more venues. So if I was only speaking to Nick yesterday, I had a bit of a fallout with a venue only this week where they want to use some of our pictures for free, which is fine, but aren't happy to recommend us as one of their recommended suppliers. So I've said no because they're not free.
Yes,
we can trade, but it's not free. Anyway, that's another topic. So you've got a book coming out, How to Photograph Gardens, and we will link to that in the show notes, and I'll be one of your first customers.
There it is.
There it is, because I know my wife would love that book.
And that's available for pre-order on Amazon.
Yes, it is. That's available
now. Without wishing to give away anything that's in the book, just looking at your photographs in the gorgeous images, and I can see the sort of the golden hour impact in lots of those as well. But a lot of the photos look like they're taken in sort of quite wide aperture lenses, very shallow depth of field. Is that a stylistic approach?
No, I mean, actually, I'm not a big. Funny, I didn't go into that earlier when we were chatting, but I don't. It's not really. It may give you that feel that's happening, but quite a lot of the shots will be sharp front to back as well. I mean, it depends on what the. I'm not a wide shooter.
Okay, what kind of gear would you typically use then? In terms
I mean, I'm a Nikon shooter, so Z9, which has been an interesting journey. I've always used Nikon, and I use Phase as well. I use a Phase IQ 160, but a lovely camera when it works. That's the problem with Phase. I mean, it's a great studio camera. I've had it for a few years now. It's a CCD sensor, which for anyone that's interested, is to this day the best sensor that was ever made, in my opinion, for color. I mean, really again, most unusable thing, really, the Phase system. But it has a certain quality to it, and when it works, it's absolutely beautiful. And if and that's what I can say, because I know other people that have experienced the CCD sensors of those early medium format backs, and they all say the same thing. But when it doesn't want to work, it would just stop working, and you'll be stuck there thinking you don't have a spare. I mean, I bought my first Phase in whenever it was 2012, I think, and you're almost remortgaging your house to buy these things. I mean, they're expensive, and it's not something you carry a spare. So over the years, I've used it less and less. I mean, it does appear in the book occasionally, but most of the time I'm shooting on the Nikon Z9. Very recently moved from the D850.
How do you feel moving to the dark side of the mirrorless?
I don't. I mean, I'm getting used to it. I'm not a fan of looking through a electronic viewfinder. I find it. Yeah. I do find it still jarring. You get used to the way. I'm sure you guys are the same. Certainly with your wedding stuff. I mean, you really start to get to know where those buttons are, don't you? Because you're working quickly
most of the time.
So, yeah. You're working far quicker than I am, but you just get used to how things look. And when you look through an optical viewfinder, the experience is much, much nicer than looking through an electronic viewfinder. And I get it for the work where you're, like a wedding is another classic example. You're seeing what you're getting, and that
you can't go back and do it again. That's the thing.
No, that has to be a really, really a huge benefit. But I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a good system. I use a collection of primes. The primes I use are 50 1.4. I use an 85 1.4. I use a macro 60 millimeter 2.8 and a macro 105. And then I use, for the bulk of the work, I use a 24 to 70, which is just the standard 2.8.
The workhorse,
yeah, Z lens. And then the same I use. So I got the 24 to 70, and then I use a 70 to 200 as well. So I'm very much treating the wider shots that I take as landscapes in effect. So they do tend to be, all on the tripod. 4:30 in the morning, the light levels are always very, very low. So it's not unusual to be shooting a second and a half, 2 seconds at say f16 or something. I'm certainly don't touch on any of this sort of photo stacking or anything like that. So I like everything to be as natural to what I'm experiencing and seeing as possible. And I still use graduated neutral density filters.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, which is often which really, and there's quite a lot of that in the book, which is I mean, I meet BBC camera men on and women on with the BBC with some of the stuff that I do for Gardener's World, and they're still very much into. They always laugh when I pop out the sort of neutral density graduated filters, because they're still using them.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, built into their cameras, I guess, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, they have to, don't they? But I mean, I do find that I have played with, shooting for the sky, shooting for the foreground, all that kind of stuff. But it's very different. It's just I for the way I work, I just love to be able to put it through over the lens. And
I think any time where you've got, in any situation where you have a bit of time to think about getting that shot, like it's landscape, and it doesn't need to be an hour, but if you've got 5 minutes just to sit down and make sure that horizons or the grad parts directly where you want it, I'm sure there's no better way to do it. I mean,
I'm a great believer in getting it right in the camera rather than just you can sort it out of Photoshop or something.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, very much so.
But for things like Steve and I would do at weddings, then, and I do the digital equivalent quite often. If I'm shooting a wedding venue or a property that I'm shooting, I'll always be bracketing. And then treating the sky differently. But it would be great to have that time that's not where time isn't so pressured, to be able to sort of sit down and get that right. Yeah,
because I do find that there are always issues with using grads. Obviously, if there's a building in the picture or there's a skyline or because I all the gardens I shoot are in various different places, both countryside, wild, as well as urban landscapes as well, and I will still use it. But the part of processing that I find that I tend to use, rather than still doing the combination of the two pictures, what I end up doing is kind of feathering in to the actual components that I go over, if you like. Because occasionally what you will do, if I'm using something like a 2-stop neutral density grad and it's touching the roof, the apex of a roof, that will become quite dark as well. There's nothing about it. So what I tend to do is just I selectively go in and reduce that, and sort of by eye, I'm very good at sort of trying to pair those things up. Because I haven't said, but I worked as a colour printer for 3.5 years as well.
Right, okay.
When I was in Bristol working at a studio. So one of the things I found that working as a hand printer really honed my colour skills, really. Yeah. So
I was going to say this about your photos, Jason. I can see there's a lot of attention gone into the tone.
Completely.
And it's not really contrasty, but it's got plenty of punch there, and it's just really accurate, natural.
Yeah.
It just looks like you are, looking out of the window into a beautiful garden. I think that's.
I agree. Yeah.
And I was going to ask if that's an intentional thing, or is it just been the result of experience?
Yeah, I think it's certainly intentional that it's as close. I mean, it's a difficult thing to say, isn't it? Because when I look at they're not always exactly what you're seeing, because I do add a few extra things to it. But as you know, it's that thing that our brain works in such a way that it fills in all the details, doesn't it? And we all know that the brain's filling in the details, but of course, when we take the files and put it onto the camera, you need to bring that back to what you were seeing at the time. Sure. But the one thing that's absolutely fundamental to all my work, and I try and make it the key, is light. I mean, because completely. as you said earlier, that I can control the light, but certainly with the wide shots, I'm reliant on daylight doing its thing. So I really, really need to sort of. I mean, that's the skill that I think I've honed
I can definitely see that. See that throughout your portfolio of. And I had a client in for training last week actually, who was thinking about how to practice. She was going through manual mode and that kind of thing, and we were talking about that. Just get into your garden is a really good place to take photos, just some practice without the pressure of being on top of a hill somewhere and just getting there. And I was explaining to her that she saw in our garden like a flower, and it was just in terrible light. I said, you're better off getting a picture of a stinging nettle that's in beautiful backlit sun than a beautiful lily that's just in some horrible shade. And
completely. Yeah. What's the most unusual garden you've been asked to photograph, Jason?
Gosh, most unusual. Now that's
unusual shoot generally, but perhaps with a garden.
I've had some. I suppose a most unusual. I suppose one of the most unusual gardens actually is unusual for its context of where it is. So I've recently finished a book with a Swedish landscape architect called Ulf Norfell, and we worked together. In fact, I initially met him because I was commissioned by Guns Illustrated magazine to go and shoot his garden. And now his garden's in Sweden, but it's not just in Sweden; it's way up in Sweden.
Oh, right. It's Stockholm or somewhere.
It's Stockholm, then it's Umeå, then it's a sort of 3-hour drive, and he's practically in the Arctic Circle. Now, Ulf is a wonderful, fantastic designer. He's done Chelsea Flower Show several times, and he's obtained gold medals, etc. He's a really worldwide known, brilliant designer, and he's got a place in Stockholm, but also his sort of home is in a place called Agnes, which is right up in this kind of northern tip of Sweden. And I had to go and photograph it it was May, so it was post Chelsea actually, so it was the end of May, and so I did the journey up there, and of course, people garden in Sweden, but they weren't gardening like he gardens. I mean, he literally had components of his Chelsea gardens that he'd previously done that he'd literally put in this place in practically the Arctic region of Sweden. So he's got this woodland with this immaculate garden in the middle of nowhere with this huge torrent of a river that runs past it.
Incredible.
And of course, I only had 2 days, but you got 24-hour light.
I was going to say that time of year, it's going to be.
So that was the thing. That's probably the most unusual garden I photographed based on. It was just remarkable.
If you're working with a garden designer, Jason, how much input do they have into the way that your photos are captured of that garden?
Well, I mean, their input is the fact they've made the garden. That's where it. I mean, I would say. I mean, to say that that's where it starts and that's where it ends, probably the wrong thing to say. But I mean, I think the thing is, it becomes a working relationship with designers because they have to I always think that micromanaging is probably the worst thing you could do in any creative situation. I think it's really, really important that you get allowed to do the job that they've commissioned you to do. There are obviously many times where I actually shoot a garden. I've got designers with me, and some designers really love the experience of being with me at sunrise, and not because one of the things about the work that I do, because I have to work so quickly. I'm sure you guys know when you get your eye into something, you get quite absorbed by something, and I have to concentrate a great deal in order to get all that work shot in such a short space of time. So the last thing I want to be doing is responding to a question about, I don't know, where you're going on your holidays this year or something. But you've got to keep small chat away, because it's a distraction. But then I do work with people that just come with me occasionally, and they will literally just be absorbed by it and flow around the garden with me, leave me, and we'll be in complete silence. They'll be enjoying the moment. I'll be doing my job, because they're seeing their work at that time in the morning, which is really important for them. It's a bit like a chef walking through a restaurant watching people eat their food. There's something
That's
about
a good analogy, isn't it?
And I think for a designer, I mean, there's a couple that I've worked with recently, Marion Boswell and Charlotte Sanderson, and they're two people that last year they like to come and join me, and I that's absolutely fine. But their involvement with what I'm actually shooting, it is not a great deal. I mean, I might get prompts before if it's a garden that I've never seen before, and a designer saying specifically they want certain things. Just remember, don't forget that I do want to have some records of a certain part of the garden, just to make sure. So I have not dislike a wedding crib sheet, really, where you might have an auntie, a very quiet auntie that that they're going to just sit in the corner all the time, unless you go over and say, look, they really want a picture of you. Otherwise, they're just going to go, aren't they? So it's,
I always see that as a personal challenge when somebody says, "Oh, they don't like having the photograph taken." Right, that's a challenge.
I bet it is actually.
So one last question for me, then I'll shut up, Nick, and I'll let you wrap up. But well, I mean, first of all, it's been fascinating talking to you, Jason. But I think you were saying before we started recording, there's about 150 recognised garden photographers or so in the UK.
That's probably
like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably. I don't actually know what it. I know at one stage I was told it probably was about that. But we do have a professional organisation. We have two things. We have the Garden Media Guild, which is a guild that looks after photographers, filmmakers, content creators, writers. But as part of the Garden Media Guild, we also have a thing called the PGPA, which is the Professional Garden Photographers Association. So we do, which is a vetted organization. So you apply, you have to join the Garden Media Guild, and then if you're a professional photographer or wanting to be, you can sort of apply to the PGPA as well.
So I guess that's where the question was going to be, was if I was thinking about wanting to become a garden photographer, what recommendations would you make to that person?
Well, I mean, firstly, I mean, the recommendations that you've really got to make sure that it's an area of work that you're prepared to get up early. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's such an important part of the work, because unlike, say, landscape photographers, most landscape photographers always tell you, we can't stand July and August. It's the worst time because the lights are appalling and all that kind of stuff. They're dead right. It's the hardest time of the year for the light, but of course, gardens are always at their peak. As a rule, they're at their peak in May and June, July. Most people prefer a late summer garden, September, because of course the light's softer. But I need to be in a garden at 4:15 in the morning in June, ready to shoot at 4:30, 4:45. So, and if it's a 100, 200 mile journey, that means quite often that I'm shooting early morning, late evening, and then trying to get some rest during the day as well. So I think that those are the things that, if someone really wants to venture into garden photography seriously,
You
really need to consider those elements to it, really, because it's but then at the same time, it's a great genre of work. I mean, I absolutely love it. It's fantastic.
And some of these planning aspects, are they in your latest book?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, all that. I go into planning because sometimes people. Another thing that certainly, because I do courses as well, workshops occasionally for various companies, and one of the things that they always I always have to kind of try and share is, if you don't have a garden or you only have a small garden, how do I gain access to other gardens? Because I mean, I was in exactly that same situation when I started, and if it wasn't for the fact that I applied to work as an agency photographer for the National Trust, I wasn't getting access to these gardens. But there's things like the Yellow Book, which is called the National Garden Scheme, which is a charitable organisation which people open. I'm sure you probably even know about it. People open their gardens on a Sunday afternoon, and it's a big thing in the UK for sure. In fact,
they do it here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you can do is you can write to the National Garden Scheme and say that you're a keen garden photographer, and in return for you offering them work for free, because you do need to do that, or for their promotions. But what it does is it then gives you access to a garden that between you and the owners, they are happy for you to say place in a magazine afterwards or place in a stock library. But in return for all that, the NGS, the National Garden Scheme, will get some pictures that they can use for their promotion. So it's a win-win situation. And certainly when I first started my career as a garden photographer, that's exactly what I did. I used to get all the gardens from the NGS and then give them a selection at the end of the year. And then
so it's the equivalent for a portrait photographer that might be working with models on a sort of photos for time.
Absolutely. Exactly. Testing. It's exactly like for like, really. That's right.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And remind us the name. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, go on.
Remind us the book's name.
Yeah.
What's the book called?
That's the same question.
How to Photograph Gardens.
Right. So that is it,
and it's published by Octopus, and it comes out Ilex, which is part of Octopus Publishing, and it comes out on that's the back cover as well. Comes out on March the 13th.
Okay, so
and we'll definitely put it in the show notes so people know where to buy it, Jason. Yeah,
people can pre-order that now on Amazon. So thanks so much, Jason. That's been fascinating. It's not often that we talk to a guest where I have no preconception about what their genre works like, and so that's been really interesting.
It has. It's fascinating. Good. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for having me.
I just want to pick up on something that you said, actually. Well, we just did a little bit of a techie session for 10 minutes, but you said about the CCD sensor of your phase one, and it just reminded me. So I had an elderly relative that died about 4 years ago. He was an uncle by remarriage, but was a keen photographer. And I inherited his camera, and it's been sitting up on my shelf upstairs. And only the day I saw it, I thought I would dig it out. So it's a Nikon D50, which is a very early, Nikon DSLR consumer camera, really. But that has a CCD sensor, I know.
Yes.
And again, for the listener, if you're not familiar with this, there is a school of thought that CCD sensors, which are pretty much, phased out now, I think, really, had a nicer, more filmic look to them than the sort of CMOS sensors that you have in modern cameras, really. And I can't even begin to get into the technicology. So
isn't there something about the global shutter sensor technology that's more like a CCD?
I don't know about that. I don't know. It could well be. The challenge with this camera is A, it's 6 megapixels. That's not a lot. And B, you can only use a 2 gigabyte SD card maximum.
Oh gosh, I mean that's really. I mean, I think I presume all of our first digital cameras were probably CCD, weren't they? Anyway?
Yeah, I might struggle to find an SD card that will fit it, but I was thinking I might just take it out on the streets and just see what I get with it, really. Yeah.
Well, the first 35mm digital camera I had was actually a Kodak. I can't even remember what it was called.
Yeah, they were one of the first ones, weren't they?
Pro.
Yeah.
They did two. They did I think it was probably the Pro 14C and the Pro 14N or something. And they did one for Canon and one for Nikon. I think it was 11 megapixels. But of course, this was, I think, probably one of the reasons why Nikon lost a lot of sort of loyal shooters when they first produced this thing, because it worked for Canon, but for Nikon, because I think it's due to due to the opening of where the lens goes on, it's a bit smaller for a Nikon camera. So of course it wasn't getting the spread onto the sensor. So what ended up actually happening was that something like, I don't know, 3.5-4% of the entirety of your edge was all cloned information. So you ended up with this file that became even smaller because you had to crop into everything because it was just
a lot to play with,
just unusable, unusable. But yeah, there is a whole array of people that really wax lyrically about the CCD sensor and some of the early kind of Leica CCD sensors as well.
Yeah, I read that as well. Yeah,
but they are they are really, really. I mean, my first phase, which is P45 Plus, was a beautiful thing. But I mean, if I took it over 100 ISO, the grain was, like grains of salt. I mean, and the noise, it was just unusable. It was
some of the wedding venues that we photographed in that'd be fun.
Oh gosh, I can't. Yeah, and of course one focus point as well, right in the center. And then trying to and then all sorts of things. I mean, back focus problems with it, but as I said, I've said it earlier, but once it had a sweet spot, and if you hit it, you were kind of really ecstatic about it.
I guess, really.
Yeah. Every 15th shot you'd win, but otherwise it's all the other ones.
That's better than my normal hit rate.
That's pretty good. 1 in 15.
So as we started the show in a really strange vein, I'm going to sort of wind things up in a similar vein as well by saying that Nick is now a published pop star.
That's right.
Yeah, so you can queue for autographs now. Yeah, so tell the dear listener about your music.
Yeah, my latest single, which is called Fearless, was released on Spotify and Deezer and Tidal and Apple Music just before Christmas. The artist name isn't Nick Church; it's Farthest North. So that's how you can find that.
Farthest North, and you live in Bristol.
Yeah, well, Jason will know where I'm coming from on this. It's my interest in Northwest Passage and exploration in the early 20th century. So, so that's just been fun. I've loved doing that, and I'll be doing some more of that this year. So, do check it out.
It's actually really good. It's all seriousness. It's a great track. Yeah, and Jason, you're saying that you're using a drum mic to talk to us right now. So you're obviously a drummer.
Yeah, my old snare mic, the SM57.
Wow.
Which is 37, I think, isn't it? Yeah, no, I used to be in a band in Bristol many years ago, but
great.
I still play a bit, but not.
Perhaps we'll join forces, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely, we should do.
I can play the full. I'm good at that.
You're the vocalist, aren't you, Steve, as well?
Yeah, I've been known to do the odd karaoke. Yeah.
There you go.
So, just one more reminder about the Facebook groups. We mentioned this last week, and we talked about a photo. Don't want to call it competition necessarily, but just an exercise where people can get involved and collaborate a bit. And so, what we're going to do, we're going to start putting in a theme into the Facebook group, and people can share their photos that broadly match that theme. We're not going to police it. We're not going to be chucking loads of time into it, but it'd be lovely to see the members of the group's work. So the first theme is going to be winter.
Okay.
Which I think is a really varied thing. So it can be a wedding, can be a landscape, can be a garden, can be anything. Go out and take some pictures now, So we'll put a thread in there, and then we'll put a post, and then people just add their photo to that. And then what we're going to do is we'll go through a few of those in the next episode.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And then the one that sort of just floats our boat the most, they'll get a little gift from my cupboard of doom in the corner there. So that could be anything from a filter to an SD card to a memory stick or something of that nature.
Or a guitar, yeah.
No, not that corner. No way.
Yeah,
that goes out of bounds.
Okay, so just to define some rules then. So we're the judges, so our decision is final. And we'll let it run, for a couple of weeks or for a month?
Yeah, I think if we do it a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And then that should hopefully fall in line with the cadence of the release of the pod. Yeah. And it's really easy, nice and light. No, and we're not saying that this is technically the best photo. It's just one that we thought, that's kind of, that's an interesting photo. But what would be good is anyone that gets submitted, we'll go through and, we'll just show them on the pod and we'll
great idea.
Who took them. Just because, it's just a nice way to get your work out, seen by the people. And It's what we've always said on this podcast is seeing other people's work is just the most inspiring thing
Completely.
Of however much experience people have got. And so I'm always really keen to see people's work because that gives you loads of ideas and I can steal them.
And just on that final point on that is that we are working, dear listener, to get this podcast on YouTube. We do have a YouTube presence, but it's the audio podcast with a thumbnail. So we're just working out the minutiae of how to actually get the video uploaded and not duplicate what we've already got on there.
It's
but it will be
progress.
coming up in the next couple of weeks. So
That's
don't forget
right.
to check out it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And obviously it's just called the Photography Pod. So Nick, Jason, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
That's it from me. It's been really
it's-
fascinating.
Yeah,
It has, absolutely.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been
Great to have
really
you on,
enjoyable.
Jason.
Really enjoyable.
It's been great to find out more about the world of garden photography. So thank you, dear listener, for listening to us for another week or another 2 weeks. We'll be back again soon with another podcast. Until then, happy shooting out there, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.